Bruce, here we are, episode 1 of Psycho Schizo Espresso. I mean, I don't know about you, mate, but I'm really looking forward to this series. And I mean, we've been talking about it for so long, haven't we? And all of a sudden, boom, or should I say zoom, here we are, the moment of truth is upon us.
Ground zero, mushroom clouds go up. And actually very appropriate that we're having mushroom clouds go up, because I finished the writing on the wall video, the Iron Maiden one, with a sort of homage to Stanley Kubrick, mushroom clouds going up, the end of the world, or is it? And our guest, our first one in Psycho Schizo Espresso, is going to talk about exactly that, because he's an expert in the end of the world.
Well, he is, and his name is Steve Friesen. He's Professor of Biblical Studies at the University of Texas in Austin, and he's one of the world experts on all things Gnostic, prophetic, divinatory, revelatory and apocalyptic. He's the author of a book as well called Imperial Cults and the Apocalypse of John, Reading Revelation in the Ruins. And I think it's probably a topic that's going to be a real treat for Iron Maiden fans around the world, isn't it, Bruce? Because he's an expert on a subject that is, pretty close to your heart, has been for a number of years, the number of the beast. We're going to find out what it really means.
I've been singing about it for years, but I've always wondered, is there more to it than the Omen 1, the Omen 2, and finding somebody with a wobbly birthmark in their hairline?
Well, I think we're going to find out now. Shall we get him on?
Yeah.
Steve Friesen, welcome to Psycho Schizo Espresso. Do you know what, Bruce? I want to kick off. I want to do my eschatology joke as well. I want to do that before we get into the serious stuff.
Okay, get the jokes out of the way. Yeah.
To be honest, I mean, I didn't even know really what eschatology was, and I saw a T-shirt in Oxford. Must have been about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was obviously a theology student. And on the front it said, "I have no idea what eschatology means," and on the back it said, "It doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world."
Oh, there you go.
I know. Oh. And that was when I found out what eschatology meant. But I had no idea that there was a branch of theology, Steve, that's actually specifically dedicated to studying the end of the world, the end of times. And that's what you are, presumably. You're an eschatologist.
Oh, I would prefer not to call myself an eschatologist. And just for the record, from the Da Vinci Code, there is no such thing as a symbologist either. I consider myself I consider myself a historian of religion, working with the religious phenomena in a historical context. And the study of theology is a sort of study of religious ideas. And then some people who are theologians train people in certain kinds of theology in order that this is the correct theology, or this is the way our group thinks about God and the divine, or about the end of the world. But I work in a public university, and I work in the study of religion more, where we aren't sure what the right answer is, but we have fun studying it. So that's what we're about. Eschatology is actually a really interesting field, and it encompasses both the end of the world, but also the end of human life. In other words, there's a corporate aspect to it and a personal aspect to it. How does the human story end? And there are endless speculations about that. But then we also all face the end of our life also. What happens at death, if anything?
I was going down that rabbit hole because I've got some. I was reading one or two things about a particular aeroplane disaster from the 30s. The crash of the airship, the R-101. So I wrote a song about it, and I'm doing a little bit of military history writing as well. So I'm doing a chapter in a book about it. But there's a very bizarre story that a medium, and there's another rabbit hole to go down, a medium, whilst having a seance, was suddenly interrupted as if somebody had selected the wrong radio channel. and suddenly started talking as if she were a dead member of the crew of the airship R101. And this came to the attention of somebody who knew somebody who was on the accident investigation committee, who was a very prosaic army major, and he turned up skeptically and took notes on what this person allegedly was saying through this medium. And there was all kinds of information that was being given directly about this is what caused the crash. You know, we had a problem with the pressure on the number one engine, and this was this. And he said nobody could possibly know this information who wasn't privy to it, because a lot of it was secret. And there are only 6 survivors of the crash. And this information would only have been available from somebody who was in the control car at the front or associated with that. So this went round the back, and it actually got put into the accident report.
Wow.
He insisted on having it put in and it was removed because they said we can't possibly believe this evidence. In any case, if you insist on putting it in there, everybody will think they're crackers and take you away to the funny farm. So but Hugh Dowding, who was the man who designed the air defence system that won the Battle of Britain and arguably saved the free world, was also a profound believer in spiritualism. And he had regular conversations, with the spirits of dead airmen who he saved. So that's what I mean by there are a lot of very intelligent people who believe in this stuff. And it's fascinating what evidence there is, if anything, for it. It's the same as astrology. That's another one. People. Yeah. I mean, I have a look at my horoscopes. There's the Monty Python. Hello, it's Monday. You have long, scaly skin and a soft yellow underbelly. You know what I mean? Oh, that's me. Yes, that's me.
Steve, I think this is fascinating. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there are more books and films on the Book of Revelation, the Book of the End of Days, the Book of the Apocalypse, whatever you want to call it, than any other book in the Bible. And I was in Tesco's, which is pretty much your equivalent of Walmart over here, and I saw a book on prophecy the other week next to 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, we are fascinated by prophecy by the end of the world. We're fascinated by how the world's going to end, asteroids, pandemics, floods, fireballs, you name it. We're fascinated by the number of the beast in the Book of Revelation. We're fascinated by the mark of the beast. And again, you've got all these things. What's this mark of the beast? Is it a microchip? Is it? I read recently even people were talking about vaccine passports. Is it that? Because you're not allowed. Apparently, in the Book of Revelation, it says, we'll come on to that in a minute. You're not allowed. You can't buy or sell without the mask of the beast. So, is it Biden's vaccine passports? Is it wearing a mask itself? All of this stuff is in. So I think maybe I don't know about you, Bruce. I mean, Steve? What is the Book of Revelation actually about? I mean, who wrote it? When did they write? What the hell is this book about?
And what had he been taking?
Yeah, absolutely. And can we get some of it?
Yeah,
yeah. It's all these questions are live issues for the Book of Revelation. I think are why it's popular. We're trying to figure out who we are. You're talking about us, trying to get a category for us. To me, it seems like we're trying to figure out individually, who am I? What kind of person am I? And also, who are we as a species? And that this particular thing about the end of times, I think, has to do with trying to figure out what's the end of our story. We're all telling ourselves stories about who we are as people, or who we are as this species on Earth. And you never have a good narrative until you have the ending.
Yeah. And
so, people, and that's something we never know because we're living through the story. It's not like we're reading a story where we can skip ahead to the end. We're living out this story, and we're trying to figure out where's this story going. And I think that's part of the desire to figure these things out, this eschatology or apocalyptic notions. And that's why there's so many variations of it. We don't know what's going on. We don't know where this whole thing is going. We can take guesses. And so it's like, instead of 50 Shades of Gray, it gets kind of bloody, and it's 50 Shades of Red. all kinds of things going on, different ways it might end. We have some, I guess there's some, happy endings to the story. And actually, Revelation itself has a happy ending. Well, happy for some people. People who, the ones who aren't thrown into the lake of fire for eternity. They, other than those people, it's a happy ending.
That's that's sort of a kind of an elitist version of it, isn't it? Really, I mean, I suppose it's odd because the end of the world always tends to be thought of as a destructive event, but I suppose you've now got thinking of it as a story, as a narrative. You've now got people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos trying to write their own end times, trying to write their own last chapter, because they're saying we don't care about the end of the world. That's old hat. We're just going to have a new world. It's just going to continue. So when the end of the world happens, we won't be there.
Yeah, there's a technology eschatology.
Exactly.
That's a terrible phrase, but you know what I mean.
Well, it's technology. That really is escapology, because that's like we're going to escape there was a game. Did you ever play it, Kevin? I don't normally play computer games, but there was a game called Sim Earth.
No, I know what you're talking about. I never played
James
it.
Lovelock guy, and you went and you had to mutate creatures from the initial Big Bang, and you could modify the atmosphere, you could terraform the Earth, and then you discovered that if you tried to make reptiles have civilizations, that they didn't get on with each other. So really you had to bring mammals to the fore, the information age. And I actually managed to evacuate humanity in Jeff Bezos' spacecraft at the end, and they all disappeared. That was the end of the
Bruce,
game.
I have no idea. I have no idea, Bruce, how you had time to become a rock star. I really don't. I mean,
it took me 3.5 days of not much sleeping to play the game from one end to the other, and that was
to become
a
rock star took you 3.5 days.
Oh, that was the original Mac Portable. That was on black and white with like little battery that lasted 2 hours.
Do you know what? You talk about that, but I heard a statistic the other day that something like 40%. Talk about technology, right? 40% of Americans at the moment think that, or are sure, or fairly sure, that Jesus will return within their lifetimes. Okay, so that's an amazing stat. 40%.
That's a lot. That's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people, but also there's this group in Silicon Valley. Steve, you might have heard of these, called singularitationists or something like that. Singularists, who think that in 2045 there will be this what they call technological singularity, where basically computing power becomes so powerful that it will develop an intelligence of its own, and this will be the apocalypse, and it will kind of take over and destroy humanity. So there's all these kinds of niche theories. You've got as I say, people, 40% of Americans believe that Jesus come back in their own lifetimes. You've got these singularitarians that in Silicon Valley think that, in 2045, supercomputers are going to take over and destroy us. From what you're saying, it seems to me, I'm a psychologist, it seems to me that, the book of Revelation is as much a psychology book than anything else. It's giving us this, it's kind of answering this need for certainty that, what's going to happen to us? And as you're saying, it's all about stories, and we all like to know the end of the story. Is there an argument that, actually, Revelation is, St. John the Divine was a psychologist in a sense? He was giving us something that we need. Or is that too much of a spin on it?
Yeah. Well, we often try to make the biblical authors into images of ourselves. And that's we all do that. But I think there is something to what you're saying. Certainly not a trained psychologist. And some people might say not a very good psychologist, or not a very good amateur psychologist even. But there is... he's speaking to the needs of his audience in the first century, and trying to address those needs in particular ways. He probably would get a malpractice suit if he, in modern terms. I
think he'd probably get a TV show, Steve. Actually, I think he'd be great on TV. He's a popular psychologist, I think so.
Yeah, but. You asked about Revelation and the setting, and maybe we could talk about that a little bit to ground this, because in the things we've been talking about, you see that Revelation is part of popular culture, and these apocalyptic patterns of destruction or imminent change and transformation, however you want to characterize these apocalyptic patterns, They're everywhere in Western culture, especially in American culture. And so people often don't think of Revelation as a book that comes from somewhere, that comes from some time and some slice of the earth. It's this holy book. It's part of the Christian Bible, the last book in the Christian Bible. But they don't think much about the historical setting. And that we know a good deal about that. Revelation talks about who it's addressing and where the author is located. And that would be the area that's now Western Turkey. He says, right at the beginning, John says, I was on the island of Patmos, which is now a Greek island off the coast of Turkey. I was on the island of Patmos on the Lord's day in the Spirit, and I heard a voice. And then he heads off into this vision of the risen Christ. And then the risen Christ has messages to 7 cities, churches, actually not the cities, but messages to churches in 7 cities. And those are all in what's now the western part of modern Turkey. So we have a good idea of where it was located. And we can tell that it seems to be a text from the late 1st century in the Roman Empire, maybe the years 80 to 100. And then you can start putting in, talking about the Roman Empire, what was society like, what was religion like, and it starts to give you a different understanding of this text. I guess I should also say that there's the other thing that people often don't realize is that Revelation is not a unique text. In the sense there are other apocalypses from that time.
I was going to ask you: was it the first one, or it was predated? Was it okay?
Their Jewish apocalyptic texts is a tradition that develops sort of in the Hellenistic period, 3rd century BCE, up into the Roman Empire, and there's a history of people writing these kind of texts. I had a vision. And I saw, sometimes they get taken off to heaven. Sometimes they see things that are going on earth. Some of the later ones take you into the afterlife and show you what kind of torments or pleasures you might receive, depending on what kind of life you lived. So Revelation, it tends to be the only text like this that modern people know about. But there are other ones. In fact, in the Bible, you have the book of Daniel, which is in Jewish scripture, which Christians usually call the Old Testament. The Christian Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, has a book of Daniel. And there are kind of 2 parts to it. First part, Daniel's in exile. He's a smart guy. He becomes a courtier in the imperial palace and a wise man. But then in the second half, all of a sudden it goes crazy and he has these dreams, beasts, angels, and world destruction and predicting the end. Finally, God's going to come down and create justice on the earth and put an end to all this evil and corruption and oppression that's been going on. That's all part of Daniel. And that's written maybe 250 years before the book of Revelation.
Wow. Okay.
So and actually Revelation at certain points draws on the book of Daniel, some of the imagery there, and does some really creative things with it.
Bruce is smiling there, Steve. Bruce is smiling. I think you've got a bit of history with the book of Daniel, haven't you, Bruce?
No, well, I just created a kind of a mashup of biblical texts for an animated video. So I appropriated the Belshazzar's feast, Nebuchadnezzar. We had a smattering of the parting of the Red Sea in the middle of it, just as a little thing. And then Adam and Eve comes at the end, because you start again. The video starts again. So we've got an homage to Stanley Kubrick at the end of Dr. Strangelove. We've got Adam
Steve,
and Eve in the back.
We didn't know you then, Steve. There might have been a paycheck in there for you there if we'd have known. You just came a little bit too late on the horizon there, mate.
Well, we have our Daniel figure, who is he's the guy you really don't want turning up at your party. you know, but he's our kind of Gandalf, Obi-Wan, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He's the, and he reincarnates himself by throwing himself into the fire. He doesn't bother with having people. I actually have him put his arms out doing the Christ pose as he falls into the fire.
Mm-hmm.
There's a no mixing another metaphor there,
Uh-huh.
But it's this whole series of things just to tell this particular story that goes through.
Hello folks, we hope you're enjoying Psycho Schizo Espresso. Make sure that you subscribe right now wherever you get your podcast to ensure that you never miss an episode. We'll be releasing episodes every other Tuesday, and you can also get in touch with us at the podcast by emailing pse@podprod.co.uk.
And of course, I sang on this song, 666, the number of the beast, which got rave reviews amongst, fundamentalist Christians, because they just loved it. It was a really good excuse to get hot under the collar. We were Satanists and all the rest
Bruce,
of it.
you've got a lot to thank the devil for, really, haven't you? I mean,
really
you've built your
have,
career on the devil, haven't you, really?
Well, there was, one of the most unlikely Cliff Richard song was "Why Does the Devil Have All the Good Music?"
Yeah.
So it's dramatic. I mean, it dramatizes our lives, and it gives us a polarity. Even if people say, "Oh, I don't believe in good and evil," it's all on a bit of a continuum, But nevertheless, stories that have the good guys and the bad guys, whether it's Marvel, DC, or whatever it is, people love a hero and people love a bad guy. You've got to have the bad guy, and the devil to me is always he's a bit ambivalent, because the way he's created. I mean, for example, Steve, was there a devil in Judaism, in the Jewish faith per se?
Not in the early phases. In the history of Israel, the devil is not a figure. He begins to come up, but not in the way that modern people tend to think of it, or modern people in the West. He doesn't come up as this evil figure or the embodiment of evil. He comes up as one of the sons of God in the kind of this patriarchal family around the God of Israel. The gods of the Middle East had, there's a high God, and then there are a lot of sons of gods who are sometimes getting in trouble, sometimes taking care of different things. And in that big court, there's this one figure who's kind of a trickster, or he's always making trouble. He's accusing people. And you see it come up in the book of Job. The book of Job is mostly these long kind of dialogues or monologues about good and evil, or why do people suffer, that sort of thing. But at the beginning, at the end, you have the Satan figure come up, and it's not the way we talk about Satan in sort of modern culture. He comes up and says, "Oh," God says, "Hey, you see Job, righteous guy," and the Satan figure says, "Well, yeah, that's because you bless him, cause him some trouble and see if he's still so righteous." And so this whole problem with Job starts out as this kind of weird bet between God and the Satan figure. And it goes through chapter after chapter of long discussions, which are really important in a different way. But then at the end, God wins the bet. So there's this phase where the Satan figure is someone who causes trouble in the extended household of the divine realm. But by the time you get up to the period we're talking about with Revelation, like a Roman Empire, among some Jewish groups, he's become the cosmic opponent to God. And then there are these two powers, a power of evil and a power of righteousness, that are at work and contending. And that's sort of the thing that you see in the book of Revelation. And it's the figure that comes up in your music and in heavy metal a lot. Is that? And I actually wanted to ask you about that. What is it with so much satanic stuff in your music?
Because it's really dramatic. And at a certain point in time, certainly for people of a certain age like me, from a what you might call a society which was, because I'm 62, so going back to like the late 50s, Europe was broadly Christian. A lot more people went to church back then than do now. You know, probably 4 or 5 times or even more, people would just turn up at church. They weren't deserted as they are now. And they would generally believe in things like absolute evil. And there'd be an absolute good, but nobody knew anybody who was absolute good. But for sure that absolute evil existed somewhere, because otherwise how could anybody be absolutely good? So you had to have something to measure yourself against it. And of course, what heavy metal bands did by adopting imagery was they shocked people. Because in the same way that the early Hammer movies reintroduced Dracula, but with sex. So they actually had, Dracula, blood, fangs, sex, the devil. All this stuff was like, oh my God, that is so shocking. But we really kind of turns us on in secret, And of course, as kids, you'd sort of like be forbidden to watch it. And of course, it would be interesting, and you'd watch it. And then you just use your imagination to create stories. And then you had films, a whole raft of films came out, The Omen and The Exorcist and things like that. That all had this idea of an actual physical force of evil. And it was quite exciting, really, not because you wanted to be it, but to know that you could imagine your way into the drama and put that into music and dramatize it.
I think also from a psychological perspective, I think all music, all kind of popular music, has in some sense been anti-establishment as well. So obviously, you think of punk rock, for instance, as the obvious example. But even, the development of rock and roll was again a departure from the norm. The hippie culture in the late '60s was long hair again. It was going against the grain of the establishment, and I think, with like heavy metal kind of music, first of all, you've got, you can't get more anti-establishment than Satan. So I think that's why there's a very powerful narrative running through it. But also our brains, the way we've evolved, we love to have these black and white contrasts. We love to think in black and white. We love to think in either or, this or that, right or wrong. And, good and evil is, God and the devil is like the most black and white manifestation of that, I think. So I think heavy metal music has got the best of both worlds. It's like the archetypal anti-establishment in terms of when you have those kinds of images of Satan and that kind of thing, but also it taps into that black and white nature of the way our brains are set up. And I don't know, Bruce, actually on the back of that, actually, I was thinking about this the other day. Heavy metal music has a really, really strong kind of merchandise associated with it. Way more, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but any other kind of music. I mean, if you see people wearing T-shirts, a lot of T-shirts are heavy metal T-shirts. A lot of them are Iron Maiden T-shirts, actually.
It's an expression of identity.
Yeah.
It's not just the aesthetics of the shirt. It's an expression of identity that you identify with that music, and with the stories of it. Doesn't necessarily mean that you are evil.
No, that's right.
In fact, quite the opposite. I think most of our, if you think of all the things in the world that are evil, like people doing random acts of violence to people, being horrid to women, pulling the wings off small animals. You wouldn't. There's a few extreme, bizarre examples of that, particularly in 1 or 2 bands in Norway that do some lunatic things like setting fire to churches. But the vast majority are there effectively using it as a form of entertainment. It is escapism. So they're escaping into a world in which they can live out fantasies of good and evil, and still come back and do the day job. and have an exciting time, and they can go to hell and back, and go, well, that was nice. They're sort of like they're infernal tourists Infernal Tourists of the Mind. That's not a bad name for a band, actually. And you can cut and slice the stories a lot of ways. The first time people discover them, they tend to interpret them fairly literally because it's the first time they found out about them. They're probably 15 or 16 years old, and they go, "Oh my God, Book of Revelations! Oh, look at that! That's a really cool image." You know, your adolescent brain just goes mental and starts writing out on the back of all your textbooks to the horror of your teachers. But if you end up progressing and doing more and more and more music down the line, you end up using it as material for storytelling and imagery for storytelling, not just retelling and being literal.
Would you say that in a heavy metal culture, does that storytelling do the same thing for people? I guess what I'm asking is, are those stories, those songs about good and evil, more than just entertainment? Do they take people to some kind of new knowledge about themselves, about the world? And how would you respond to that?
Well, there's two things there. There's two elements to that. One is there sufficient content in the song to justify that? And the truth is that 50% or more than 50% of the time there isn't. So there's nothing particularly new about some songs. You go, well, okay, that's a song about the devil. You know, okay, great. What's new about that? But sometimes you can twist things around, as we did with this song "Writing on the Wall." You have a little twist on the story. So I did a song called "Flight of Icarus," okay, which takes the Icarus legend, the fable, but I turned it on its head. I made it about being a pushy parent. So in the Icarus story, it's Icarus's fault. It's like you are the message you get from the Greek story is you are the young hothead. It's your fault you died. You flew too close to the sun, right? If you'd done what your dad said, this would never have happened, right? And it's like I turned it on its head and I went, no, your dad is an asshole. Your dad strapped a pair of wings on you, who were an undeveloped adolescent brain, and said, go and fly. Well, what the hell did you expect he was going to do? He was just going to fly as high as he could. So it's your fault. Why did you put the wings on him? Why didn't you do it yourself? You know, so I said, it's your fault, Dad. It's not the kid's fault. So when you do things like that, you twist it slightly and you give people a new perspective on something if they're amenable to it. But some people are not amenable to it. They only see what is literal.
On that question of identity, you were posing to Bruce there, I don't know if you're aware of some of the psychology behind belief in apocalyptic theories, but it's really interesting. Studies have been done on people that are particularly into doomsday scenarios and doomsday prophecies, and there seems to be a certain broad kind of personality characteristic that unites them, and also is very common with people that believe strongly in conspiracy theories as well. And it tends to be a combination of people that have a sense of powerlessness, who have low self-esteem, who might feel marginalised, but also have a high need for what we call uniqueness. So if you put those kinds of characteristics together, so a high need for uniqueness, low self-esteem, a sense of powerlessness, a sense of marginalisation, you can see how secret knowledge or kind of hidden codes and that kind of thing can be really appealing, because it kind of gives you that sense of power, of gnosis, as Bruce was talking about there.
I mean, one of the ultimate examples of an apocalyptic cult, which turned into a horrific reality, was the Nazi Party. Because if you want the apocalypse, that's as close as you were going to get, in the real world, was them. And all of those elements, Kevin, were in there. You had
Yeah.
people who were marginalized.
Yeah.
You had people with a need for uniqueness.
Yeah.
And they manipulated the
Yeah.
trappings of religion and indeed of occultism and the devil,
and of course at its extreme end, need for uniqueness, which is, we're all on that spectrum, Bruce, need for uniqueness, but at an extreme end it becomes narcissism. That's where it starts getting into narcissism. We're all on the need for uniqueness, but yeah, you're quite right. At the extreme end, you get extreme narcissism.
Oh, and Nazism, absolutely.
Not Nazis and Nazis. That's
Nazi,
right. Yeah.
Well, actually, the Nazis
I'm having
were
trouble
very,
saying apocalyptic. I've been practicing that for a week, Steve, just for you.
It's the Acropolis, mate. That's a building in Greece. No, that's the Acropolis. No, that's...
but Steve,
Acropolis now. Oh no, wait.
Yeah,
that's
okay. Stop it. Yeah.
The obvious question, going to the number of the beast, is 6 foot. Let him who hath wisdom calculate the number of the beast. Isn't 666? I mean, I've often the obvious question to ask is, why doesn't he just tell us who it is? If he knows who it is, why bother with the games? Was John the first Dan Brown? Was he actually? Did he have this kind of? He knew how to draw his readers in. I mean, obviously
I wouldn't want to insult John with that epithet.
Well, I'm eulogising Dan Brown here as well, Bruce. But I mean, why not just tell? I mean, it's a good point you raised, Steve. I think why not just tell us who it is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's the whole. Okay, first of all, John did not cash in the way Dan Brown did, so that's one obvious difference. But why does he give this number? Part of it is the structure of thinking in this text and in apocalyptic thinking is, you see something going on in the world, but there's really something else going on behind it.
Yeah.
You see on the superficial things, the events that are happening, but there's something behind the scenes that is determining what's going on. You can see the way this can immediately slip into conspiracy, all sorts of conspiracy things. And actually, it might be helpful to think about Revelation as a conspiracy theory. And it's a conspiracy theory that has all these things going on in the Roman Empire, in the churches of his time, and behind the scenes is a battle of God and Satan for the destiny. And it's not according to John, it's not much of a battle, because he knows that God's going to win. That's his assertion. In spite of what's going on, in spite of the things you see on the surface, God's won the battle behind the scenes already through Jesus. So there's there's that structure of thinking about our perception and the world. And so to just tell you, the beast is boom, boom, that's not the apocalyptic way. It's to draw you in and to get you to start thinking about what's behind the scenes, and what's really going on in the world. Now we have a fairly good idea of what he did mean by the number 666. It's pretty obvious from the text that these beasts he's describing and the dragon all have to do with the way the Roman Empire functions. It's a portrait of the Roman Empire as the embodiment of evil. And we can get into that a little bit more if you'd like. But he's already
propaganda text.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, people would understand that. They would understand the sort of the kind of the allegorical nature of the story, would they?
Yeah. Let me give you the Revelation 12 and 13, where the number of the beast comes up. Give you a little bit of background on that. I mean, it's one of John's greatest hits. They're parts of Revelation that are his greatest hits. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the New Jerusalem, the mark of the beast, this is one of them. He has this mythic story going on in chapters 12 and 13. It's kind of after chapter 11, there's kind of this break, and all of a sudden he says, "And I saw a woman in heaven, clothed in the sun, with the moon under her feet, and she's about to give birth to a child, And then there's a red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns who's standing there waiting. He's going to consume the child as soon as it's born. But then she gives birth. The child is whisked away to heaven. The woman flees to the desert, and the dragon is outraged. So he starts a battle in heaven. And it's the dragon, who is then identified as Satan, cosmic embodiment of evil. The dragon and his armies of angels against Michael, the archangel, and his armies of angels. They have a battle. Michael wins. The dragon's cast down to earth. He's got limited time, and he's going to go find that woman. He tries to find her in the desert. The earth protects her. He tries to drown her with water coming out of his mouth. Then the earth swallows the water, and he's thwarted. Okay, this is not the kind of stuff you hear in the Gospels. So,
no, but it's the kind of stuff you've seen.
Sounds like one of your videos,
it's a Marvel.
Steve.
It's a superhero.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Marvel comic.
It is. And then the dragon stands on goes to the seashore and stands there, and that's where we get 2 beasts that lead us to the 666.
Yeah.
He said first a beast comes out of the sea, and this beast also has 7 heads, but it's not a dragon. It has parts of a lion, a bear, a leopard, and this is where he's taking Daniel imagery and crafting a new image, and this is clearly, to anybody who knows Daniel or anybody who just thinks a little bit about it, this is an image of the Roman Empire as a beast that's dominating the land.
Okay.
Read the first part of Revelation 13, and you see that. So you've got this Roman Empire who's empowered by Satan that's dominating that. Then a second beast comes up, and this is called a beast from the land. And of course, specialists in Revelation have lots of interpretations of this. In general, they tend to say this beast from the land is sort of the local elites who make the empire work. The way you run an empire is you get some local people who know how to run things locally and use them to keep things under control in different places. And that's kind of the image that's being built up here in Revelation 13. There's the imperial beast and the beast from the land. And so they together they dominate the land. They even defeat the saints of the churches, and they have absolute control. And then at the end of 13, we get our image, and it says this land beast gives everybody the mark of the other beast, either on the hand or on the forehead. And if you don't have that, you can't buy and you can't sell. I mean, you're basically you're going to die. And then John says, and now here is the mind of wisdom. See, he's not going to just come out and tell you. Wise people know what's going on behind the scenes. And so here's the mind of wisdom. The mark is a number, and it's the number of a human, and the number is 666. And so then, what's 666 mean? And this is where historical work has helped us a lot. It's a riddle that you can play with. I guess I should give you one piece of background here. In Greek, they didn't have numerals. You couldn't just write a 6. You had to write out the whole word, or you could use the 6th letter of the alphabet. They used the letters of the alphabet for numbers, for the numerals.
Right.
So any word, any name can have a number. I tried this with my name. Turned Steve into Greek, comes out to Stephanos. And
can you do ours for us at some point, Steve?
Well, that'll be a consultant's fee. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. Bruce, I'd love it if your name came out as 666.
Well, I couldn't get mine to come out as 666. I tried, my name in Greek, my name in English, my middle name, my full name. I tried misspelling my name, and I couldn't make it work. But that's the kind of number game that is being played here. It's called gematria in the in the ancient world, where you take a word and you can play with it and make it come out to different significant numbers.
In current occult sort of like circles, it's called numerology.
Numerology,
it's exactly. It's which is a similar, but obviously back then you were much. It had different origins, but it's a similar kind of idea. But sorry.
Yeah, and so what it turns out is the name Nero Caesar works. You have to have it. It's kind of weird. You have to take Nero Caesar and put it into Hebrew, but then it comes out to be 666, and that's probably the best solution for that riddle, because this is a text that's written after at least a decade, maybe 2 or 3 decades after Nero, and he's remembered as someone who instigated some local persecutions against Christians. He's remembered as a horrific emperor by some, and he became a mythic figure himself as a dead emperor. In fact, we have records of some people claiming that Nero was going to come back. Not Christians, just people think Nero, he didn't really die. He escaped to the east, and he's coming back with armies, and he's going to retake the Roman Empire. And so this figure of Nero looms large in the culture, but he looms large especially for the churches. And John's playing with that, saying, you want to know the number of the beast? It's 666. And that probably
Steve,
is a reference to Nero.
When I was doing a little bit of research for this, I discovered as well that there was, so on the Nero theory, there was a really, really ancient text, one of the first texts of Revelation. It was found in Egypt in an archaeological dig. And it actually had the number 616, which, if I'm right in saying, in another script also adds up to Nero, doesn't it? So it's kind of, it kind of, there's these two kinds of pointers to Nero, both numerological. Is that right? So we're pretty certain what this number means.
Yeah. If you go through Latin, you get one answer. If you go through Greek and Hebrew, you get a different answer. But one of them is 666 and one is 616. And so those manuscripts that have 616 are probably playing with that same name.
All right, folks, we're going to leave it there for now. This is the first half of a two-parter with Professor Steve Friesen of the University of Texas at Austin. I hope you're enjoying it. We certainly are. But there's certainly enough here for 2 episodes rather than 1. I mean, you okay with that, Bruce? Should we keep going in the second half?
Well, I mean, I did one of my solo albums was actually called Accident of Birth. And this is a curious accident of birth, because how long, in fact, you're going to tell me, but I actually know, but it's for the benefit of the people that might be listening. I couldn't believe it, that we've recorded exactly how much of this. We've doubled, triple sixed it.
We have, because we've been recording at the end, we will have done anyway, for 2 hours and 12 minutes, which my calculator tells me is double 66 minutes. Sheer coincidence. It really is. We've ended up with double 66, 2 hours and 12 minutes of the Book of Revelation.
We ranged far and wide, in the subsequent discussion about the apocalypse and all things like that, which is an entirely, different sort of tributary of where we were at. So it's well worth getting him back on and getting another episode. But that's the end of this one for now. That's the first one.
So the first one we can call Apocalypse Now, and the second one we can call Apocalypse Then.
Then, or when.
Apocalypse Why. Stay tuned. Stay tuned, folks.
Apocalypse what?
Stay tuned, folks. You'll find out.
Psycho Schizo Espresso was a pod production. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to contact us pse@podprod.co.uk or hashtag Psycho Schizo Espresso.